The Locket of the Northern Duke. In the northern reaches of the empire, where winter ruled longer than any season and iron fortresses stood like frozen giants across the snowfields, the House of Nox governed the northern dukedom with unmatched military might. He suddenly wakes up from what seems like a nightmare. He is unable to breathe for a moment before clarity returns. He is reborn. He remembers everything that had happened before, which destroyed him and everyone else. He must protect what he can and must take revenge on evildoers.
Hey, don't forget to give thumbs up, give me a comment, and subscribe to see part 2. Now let's get into the story.
At the center of this formidable house stood its heir, Alexander Nox. The young Alpha Duke was a man spoken of with awe and distance. Tall, sharp-eyed, and bearing the cold dignity of a born ruler, Alexander embodied the very pride of the North. His swordsmanship was unmatched among the noble heirs, his command of military formations flawless, and his presence carried the weight of authority that few dared challenge. But Alexander Nox had one fatal flaw. He did not care for people. He ruled with ability, not affection. He trusted strength, not emotions. Those beneath him admired his power but feared his heart. And among those he neglected most, was his own fiance. The Omega from the East. Lucius Morton, the Omega heir of the Eastern Dukedom, had been promised to Alexander since childhood. The engagement was meant to unite two powerful houses. Lucius was beautiful in a way that seemed fragile under the northern sky, soft silver hair, pale eyes, and a quiet dignity that many mistook for weakness. But to Alexander, Lucius was simply irrelevant. Alexander neither insulted him nor cherished him. He treated the engagement as political duty, nothing more. When Lucius spoke, Alexander rarely listened. When Lucius waited for him, Alexander often never arrived. The distance slowly carved wounds that pride could not hide. That was when Keelier Nox appeared. The second son. Keelier Nox was Alexander's younger brother. An illegitimate son. Though the Duke had acknowledged him, the difference between the two brothers could never be erased. Alexander stood as the rightful heir. Praised, respected, feared. Keelier stood in the shadow, and shadows learn how to move unseen. Where Alexander showed indifference, Keelier showed warmth. Where Alexander remained distant, Keelier offered sympathy. To Lucius, who had long endured silence, that sympathy felt like salvation. One evening beneath the lantern-lit corridors of the northern palace, Keelier spoke quietly to him. If Alexander only understood Omega pheromones, perhaps he would see you differently. Lucius hesitated, drug him slightly. Keelier whispered, his voice gentle. Let your pheromones reach him. If he responds, the engagement will be sealed by instinct. If he rejects you, then everyone will know this marriage cannot continue. Lucius knew the risk. The imperial law forbade uncontrolled pheromone incidents among nobles. In this age of advanced alchemy and magical engineering, suppressants and devices ensured such incidents never happened. Violations could mean death, but Lucius still hoped, perhaps, just once Alexander would look at him. So he agreed, the night of humiliation. That night, inside the palace resting chamber, the plan unfolded. Alexander entered the room after drinking the wine Lucius prepared. The drug was subtle, designed only to weaken an alpha's resistance. Lucius released his pheromones. For a moment, the room filled with trembling tension. Lucius waited, hoped, but Alexander's expression turned cold.
Please.
Have you lost your mind?
Do not touch me.
He said, his voice sharp with fury. At that moment, the chamber doors burst open. The servants, knights, nobles, they all froze at the sight. The heir of the North sitting beside an Omega fiance, pheromones heavy in the air. A scandal. Alexander stood instantly, anger blazing. Lucius Morton, he said harshly. Explain yourself. Lucius's eyes filled with tears, but he lowered his head and spoke softly. He forced me. Silence crashed over the room. The Duke himself stepped forward and struck Alexander across the face. The heir of the North had never been struck before, but that night he was disgraceful, the Duke said. Perhaps I must reconsider which son shall inherit this house. And thus the crack between brothers. The fall of Alexander Knox. From that night onward, the competition for succession began. Keelier moved carefully. He whispered to nobles. Guided decisions. Earned trust. Slowly painted Alexander as arrogant and dangerous. Alexander, proud and unaware, ignored the shifting tide. The final trap came years later. The Duke was poisoned. Evidence pointed to Alexander. Documents. Witnesses. Circumstances perfectly arranged. Alexander denied it, but Keelier had already won the court. The Duke's judgment was merciless. Alexander Knox was stripped of his title and exiled from the northern dukedom. The once mighty heir vanished from the empire's political stage. Lucius's fate. Lucius believed he had escaped the unwanted marriage. He returned to the eastern dukedom, but noble houses rarely forgive scandals. Within months he was forced into marriage with an aging imperial official, an alchemist obsessed with extracting magical crystals from omega bodies. Lucius endured the torment for 2 years. Then one winter night, beneath a sky filled with silent snow, he climbed the tower of the eastern palace and stepped into the darkness. The murder in the fireplace house. Years later, far from the northern capital, Alexander lived in a broken house beside a fading fire. His once proud life had dissolved into quiet survival. Then one night, a visitor arrived, Keelier Knox. Now the ruling Duke of the North. He stood beside the fireplace, watching Alexander with calm amusement. You always wondered how everything collapsed, Keelier said, and then he told him. The manipulation of Lucius, the whispers in the court, the poison, every single step. Alexander sat silently, holding an old locket. Keelier's voice softened. You know, if you had shown me even a little kindness growing up, I might have followed you instead. He drew his blade, and if you had treated your fiance with even a fragment of care, none of this would have happened. The blade pierced Alexander's heart. Alexander collapsed, gripping the broken locket. Inside it was a tiny enchanted crystal that recorded the moment of death. Regret flooded his fading mind. He had ignored his sister's dreams, trusted false friends, and treated the one person who tried to love him as nothing. I wish, he whispered weakly. If I had another chance. Behind Keelier, suddenly, a sword pierced through his chest. And Keelier falls down dead instantly. Assassins hidden in the dark is revealed as they walk closer. Alexander was shocked to this. He thought everything was his brother's scheme, but real enemies Alexander had never even discovered are truly hidden deep. As life faded from his vision, Alexander realized something horrifying. The northern dukedom had been surrounded by hidden conspiracies all along, and then, the locket shattered. Time reversed. The second beginning, Alexander Knox opened his eyes. The scent of omega pheromones filled the room. The same chamber, the same night. Lucius stood before him, trembling. The moment of humiliation had returned, but this time, Alexander remembered everything. His anger surged like a storm. His pheromones burst out uncontrollably, sharp and overwhelming. Lucius froze in terror. Alexander grabbed him suddenly, pulling him close. Lucius gasped. Alexander leaned down beside his ear. Why are you scared? He murmured coldly. Wasn't this what you wanted? Lucius's eyes widened. Alexander's grip tightened as he whispered. You drugged me so we could do this, didn't you? Lucius tried to pull away, panic filling his face, but Alexander caught his ankle and pulled him back. He held him firmly, his voice low and dangerous. Then I suppose I should grant your wish. Outside the chamber doors, servants began to panic. The pheromones spilling from the room were too strong. Stop them, someone whispered in horror, but another servant shook his head, an alpha in heat with an omega inside the royal resting chamber. Breaking the door now could cause an even greater crime. Inside the chamber, tension thickened like a storm ready to break. Alexander turned to face him. So we will give them a different story. Lucius blinked in confusion. Alexander walked toward the door and straightened his coat. We will say the wine was tainted by faulty alchemical suppressants. That the pheromones leaked accidentally. Lucius stared at him. You're helping me? Alexander looked at him with unreadable eyes. No, he said simply. I'm helping myself. He opened the door. Outside, dozens of worried faces stared at them. Alexander's expression was perfectly composed. There has been a minor alchemical malfunction, he said coolly. No further action is required. The servants immediately bowed. None of them dared question the heir of the northern dukedom. But in the hallway, hidden behind a marble pillar, Keelier Knox watched everything. His calm smile did not reach his eyes. Interesting, asterisk, he thought. Something about Alexander felt different tonight. ####. The days that followed. Alexander changed everything. Not openly. Not dramatically. But carefully. He remembered every mistake of his previous life. The first thing he did was begin observing people. Servants. Knights. Advisors. And most importantly, Keelier. In the past, Alexander had never considered his brother a threat. He had dismissed him entirely. Now he watched Keelier like a hawk watching a snake. Keelier still played the same role. Kind. Supportive. Humble. But Alexander now noticed the details he had once ignored. The way Keelier spoke privately with certain court officials. The way rumors began spreading subtly through the palace. The way nobles who supported Alexander slowly began drifting toward Keelier's circle, the same web. The same trap. But this time Alexander saw every thread. ##### The Forgotten Sister. One afternoon Alexander visited someone he had not spoken to properly in years. His younger sister. Lysara Knox. A quiet beta girl who spent most of her time buried in magical engineering manuals. In Alexander's previous life, he had barely acknowledged her existence. Now he stood at the doorway of her workshop. Metal constructs floated in midair under alchemical runes. Lysara turned in surprise when she saw him. "Brother?" Alexander looked around the room. "You built these?" She nodded nervously. "They're only prototypes. Father doesn't really support magical engineering research for the military." Alexander studied the hovering constructs carefully. In his previous life, the Empire's enemies had eventually developed weapons exactly like these. Weapons that had nearly destroyed the northern armies. And the solution had been Lysara's theories. But no one had listened to her until it was too late. Alexander turned back to her. "Continue your research." Lysara blinked. "I'll fund it personally." Her eyes widened. Really?" Alexander nodded once. For the first time in years, Lysara smiled at her brother. ##### The Omega he once ignored. Meanwhile, Lucius Morton could not understand what was happening. Alexander no longer ignored him. But he did not treat him warmly either. Instead, Alexander watched him with a strange intensity. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they simply sat in silence during formal dinners. Dismissed him. Lucius felt strangely unsettled. The cold indifference that once hurt him so deeply had vanished. But in its place was something far more confusing. Attention ####. Keelier's suspicion. Weeks passed. Keelier grew increasingly uneasy. Alexander was supposed to be arrogant. Reckless. Blind to politics. Instead, the heir of the North had suddenly become careful. Even their father began noticing. "The boy has improved," the Duke remarked during one council meeting. Keelier's fingers tightened under the table. That was not supposed to happen. Alexander was supposed to destroy himself just like before. So Keelier decided to push the next piece on the board. ####. The imperial announcement. 1 month later, a royal messenger arrived from the capital. A golden decree was read in the northern court. The emperor announces the upcoming imperial selection. A murmur spread through the nobles. Every 10 years, the empire held a competition among the heirs of the great houses. Military command, political intelligence, magical strategy. The victor would gain enormous influence within the imperial court and greatly strengthen their family's future. The Duke of the North looked toward his sons. "Well," he said slowly, "it seems the empire wishes to see which Knox heir truly deserves the future." Keelier smiled calmly. Alexander remained silent. But inside his mind, memories flashed. In his previous life, this competition had been the turning point where Keelier's schemes truly began. And eventually led to Alexander's exile. This time, Alexander gently touched the broken locket hidden beneath his clothes. The crystal inside it glowed faintly. Time had given him a second life. And this time, he would not lose the North. Not to his brother. Not to hidden enemies. Not to fate itself. Alexander had already begun changing the board.
Give me a comment for next part. Thanks for watching.